Today is an amazing day because you never have to buy bread again. To make this recipe you will need a sourdough starter, but don't worry, it's super easy to make. I have a full video on the topic right here. Everything starts with your sourdough starter. The sourdough starter is the most important piece of the bread making process. Your dough that we're about to make is nothing different than a gigantic sourdough starter. And the signs you should be looking out for with your sourdough starter. You should be seeing some pockets of air from the side here, also probably from the bottom. And please take note of the scent of your sourdough starter. A ripe starter should have dairy or vinegary notes. Most of the time that something goes wrong with the bread making process, it's because the sourdough starter isn't there where it should be yet. So if you're just getting started, applying 1 feeding per day to your sourdough starter is a good idea. If you're an expert, you probably know what you're doing. This is not as important anymore. But with each subsequent feedings, your cultures are going to become better at fermenting flour. So the older your starter is, the better it is at making you great bread. Now all this information can also be found in my almost completed book. I'm making this book completely free because I believe everyone on this planet should be able to make bread at home. I'm sharing a link in the description, but warning, it's a very nerdy bread book. Now the book is free, but if you like, you can support the project. I would appreciate that, but there's absolutely no need. You see what I did there? Okay, sorry, let's go on. For this recipe, you want to be using a flour that's relatively strong. I used 800 grams of bread flour and 200 grams of whole wheat flour. The bread flour that I've been using is from the Italian brand Caputo. It has around 13 grams of protein, so it can withstand a long fermentation process. The higher this value, the longer you can ferment. And the long fermentation is really crucial to make excellent sourdough bread. But don't worry, even if you don't get that strong of a flour, this recipe is going to work. And that's because we are using a stiff sourdough starter. If you're a beginner though, I recommend to go for a strong bread flour. It's going to make things a lot easier. And I really love this mix. 800 grams of bread flour and 200 grams of this delicious, just look at this. You can see the bran particles still in here. This delicious whole wheat flour. One additional note, as the whole wheat flour contains a lot more enzymes than the bread flour, adding a little bit of whole wheat flour is going to speed up the fermentation process. And this is something that I definitely want because right now it's so cold in Germany already, around 20 degrees Celsius. So things are gonna take a lot longer compared to at 25 degrees. If everything was ready maybe in 10 hours before, it would now take probably 20 hours to finish. Next up, I'm going to be adding around 600 grams of water. So this makes a relatively stiff dough, almost a pizza-like dough. But by doing so, you are creating a super versatile dough that you can use for almost everything. The water temperature that I like to use is around room temperature. Next, I'm adding around 20 grams of salt. And then comes the sourdough starter. I'm using around 100 grams of sourdough starter. That's around 10% based on the flour. With the amount of sourdough starter, you can influence the fermentation speed. So in summer times, what I sometimes do is I go way lower. Bakers like to use baker's math. So that's how much of this calculated based on the flour. So we have 1000 grams of flour and I used 100 grams of sourdough starter. That's 10%. In summer times, I sometimes go as low as 2.5 to 5%. That would be 25 grams to 50 grams of sourdough starter. However, if it gets even colder, I might go up to 20%, 200 grams. This way I can adjust that my fermentation shouldn't take 20 hours, but maybe only 10 hours. What you need to know though, the more sourdough starter, the more pre-ferment you add, the more careful you have to be about the structure of your pre-ferment. So if your pre-ferment is already very, very, very ripe, then you're starting the fermentation in not such a good balance. You have to be more careful when to add your sourdough starter. If you use less, your sourdough starter is going to regrow inside of your main dough. And I think this is really the beauty because now the sourdough starter had around 50 to 60% hydration. So for 100 grams of flour, around 50 grams to 60 grams of water. And so does the dough. So the sourdough starter matches sort of the dough that we are making, except the salt. And now starts the first stage of mixing everything together. I like to use a large metal pot. I can just close the lid. That makes things so much easier. And now we have to apply a little bit of our magic hands to the dough. We're just going to be incorporating everything until we see that everything has been nicely homogenized. We don't want any large chunks of starter to be left here. So this is the only goal. Make sure that we see no large chunks of starter left and no chunks of flour. I typically do this for around 5 minutes, and I just start like this, and then I massage the dough a little bit. Now you could of course also be kneading everything in your stand mixer. I would recommend to knead for around 5 minutes on medium speed, take a break of 15 minutes and then continue knead another 5 minutes. If you're just getting started though, I recommend using your hands just because you develop a look and feel for the dough. And seriously, it's so little effort. Probably the only tool you need when making bread is probably a scale. I'm always trying to teach everyone to use as few tools as possible because you don't really need any tools. Everybody can bake bread. Nothing is required. You actually don't even need an oven. You can make amazing bread on your stove. So start making your own bread today after watching this video, please. And this dough looks quite okay. I guess it has been around 4 minutes, maybe 5. And I can see the dough also already starts to stick less to my hands and also less to the container. I have no more chunks here of flour left, so that's a good sign, and that's been too much sport. So we need to take a break of 5 minutes, and this small break is gonna magically knead our dough for us just by waiting. Of course, if you wanted to do a workout, you could knead the dough, but if you're just smart about it, you have to knead less. 15 minutes is gonna make all the difference. So check this out. This is now our dough. You can see how it tears already, right? And in just a few minutes, that's gonna be all the difference. 15 minutes passed, and let's have a look at our dough now. And you see this, just by waiting, we already developed a great gluten network. This is gonna trap all the gas during the fermentation process. It's going to make your dough very, very fluffy. Exactly what you want for a wheat-based dough. I'm actually already so happy with how this is. I'm not gonna be kneading this dough for a lot more. I just take the dough out and put it on my counter. Now I'm extracting a tiny piece of the dough, and this is going to be a complete game changer for you. I take this piece of dough and I place it in a small cylindrical shaped container. It could also be a shot glass. Now the crazy thing about this is we can read when our dough is ready, and if you have a similar flour like I do, we're gonna stop at around a size increase of 50%, and then we know our dough is ready. This could take 6 hours, it could take 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. Your dough is going to tell you when it's ready. So don't look at the clock, just look at this fermentation meter. So 9:30, very late for German. And this would be roughly doubling in size, but this is what I'm aiming for, roughly a 50% size increase. And I have to keep this close to my dough, and that's why it's important that we use room temperature water for the dough. We want the fermentation of this and this dough to be roughly the same speed, and temperature is essential. If the temperature changes a lot in your kitchen, you have to be a little bit careful with this method. So we have a dough that's ready, and we actually kneaded it less than I expected. The gluten network has been nicely developed. These are the signs that you should look out for. If you aren't there yet, what you have to do is you have to knead your dough a little bit further. Knead it for another 5 minutes, take another 15 minutes break, check the gluten network, and if it's good, you're ready to roll. And for kneading, all I typically do is I take the dough and I fold it on top of itself like this, just inside of the bowl. And I just keep doing that for a little bit of time. There are so many different techniques, it doesn't matter, choose whatever you like. But then wait a little bit, check the gluten network, the window pane, if that's there, all is great. This is essential for making this dough. So you want to have a developed gluten network. Alrighty, so now the dough surface is not very nice and smooth. So if we touch the dough, it starts to stick to my hands. Not that much, but a little bit. We're going to change that. We will go to the dough and then we will drag it over the surface. And note how this area does not move. This only works because we have no flour on the surface. And I keep doing this from all the sides. And note how the surface here is becoming way smoother. But also here, the surface is tearing. This is because I'm doing this because I just need it. So in this case, just wait a little bit more and like 5 minutes and then try this again. But it's good that this is happening so that I can show you. The more tension you create, the more it's gonna tear at some point. I think this is the single most underrated thing you need to know when making a dough, how to make a smooth dough ball like this. So just dragging over the surface, no tools are needed. I'm just gonna wait another 5 minutes, do this again so the surface is super smooth, and then I'll continue. But what you would do then is, you would just take your dough put it in your container, close the lid, and now your bulk fermentation starts. And we're gonna be waiting until this increases to around 50% in size. Around 6 hours later, if it hasn't, I'm gonna be applying a stretch and fold. I'll show you exactly how to do that. Completely optional though, if you ask me. So see you in a bit. Hello again, it's been around 7 hours and our dough sample has not increased in size that much, but don't worry too much about it because it's exponential growth now. Let's have a look at our dough. It looks really nice. We can see that it has increased in size a little bit, a few bubbles. This is definitely on the way. Now, one thing that I like to do is when I see that the dough flattened out quite a lot, I like to give it a stretch and fold. The stretch and fold will glue together the dough a little bit more. And because we didn't need so much at the start, this is going to create additional dough strength. That's something that you definitely want because it allows your dough to rise upwards more in the oven. You'll have a better consistency, a better tasting bread in the end. So you can knead more at the start, which is something I would recommend you to do when you make an overnight dough, or you can apply a couple of stretch and folds if you have some time in between. And only do so when you see the dough flattened out quite a lot. So don't do this every hour. Well, you could if you have time, if you wanted to, but it's not required. So the dough flattened out and now is the time to apply a stretch and fold. And that's always part of my teachings because I like to teach you when to do certain things and the signs to look out for, because you can't just follow a recipe blindly. You always likely have to adapt a little bit for your environment. So wetted hands and let's stretch and fold. I'm carefully removing the dough from the edges of the container. And now I'm lifting the dough upwards with my 2 middle fingers and I'm folding the dough over. I rotate the container and now this side here has to go to the bottom. This really glues your dough together, creating you a super strengthful dough. One more time from the other side. Dough like this. And now place it again on top. So this is how the dough looks from the side now. Now the dough is going to rest more until I see that I reached the 50% size increase here. See you later. Hello again. In total, we have been waiting for around 12-ish hours and our dough has now increased by 50% in size. So this is ready. This year, I'm gonna feed this. And this is going to be my next sourdough starter again. So I'm not gonna throw this away. This will be my next starter for tomorrow's bake. I'm just gonna take this out, feed it again and use it tomorrow. This is what people call the zero waste method because you don't waste any starter at all. So I'm just gonna regrow exactly how much starter I need for my bread making tomorrow. It's just gonna be a small batch, 1 or 2 loaves at the same time. Let's take this dough now and divide and pre-shape it. We will be making 1 loaf, 1 baguette, 1 pizza and 1 bread roll, all from the same dough. Again, with wetted hands, I'm taking the dough and I'm placing it on the surface. Now, I like to be very German about this, and so I'm gonna measure the weight of the small dough pieces that I'm making. The pizza is gonna be around 260 grams, so is the baguette, and then I'll take 1 bun and the rest I'll leave for the bread. I'm using a dough scraper, but you could definitely also just be using a knife. With the swift movement, I'm cutting into the dough, trying not to tear the dough as much. Wow, this is the perfect pizza size already. 370, a little bit more, but that's okay for my baguette. 130 for my bun, and let's measure the rest, 950. Okay, that's gonna make a nice bread too. Now the problem that we have is our pieces of dough don't really look very nice and smooth, do they? So we need to round them up. This is what's called the pre-shape. And we do the same movement that you learned earlier. We drag the dough over the surface and make a nice round, smooth dough ball. I like this, perfect, right? I'm just gonna pop the super large pocket here, our bun, bread roll, pizza, and our baguette. Oh, and just look at these nice bubbles here. Such a great dough. Now, because the gluten is very elastic, because we just worked the dough, we have to wait a little bit to give our doughs the final shape. And for this, I'm just letting the dough sit here at room temperature for around another 15 minutes. and then we'll proceed with the final shaping. Hello again. So I've prepared the tools that we need for the next steps. For the main bread, I'm using a banneton to prove it. It's made out of wood and it has a linen which helps to absorb a little bit of the water. For the baguette and our bun, I'm using this linen here where I'll be proofing them inside. And lastly, for the pizza dough, I'm going to be placing this under a wetted kitchen towel. Amazing, all these types of breads coming from the same dough, right? I think this is where this recipe really shines. It's going to make you amazing homemade yummy products. The dough is not too wet, it's not too dry. I think it's the perfect balance of everything. And you no longer have to buy any yeast again. All 100% natural fermentation. Okay, let's get started with the big bread first. Now is the time to flour it a little bit. I can remove the dough from the surface. This is also how your dough should behave. I'm stretching this a little bit into a rectangular shape. This side is sticky, the other side not. I'm just taking this right side and I'm putting it into the middle, carefully tucking it down. Same thing now from the other side, pretty much gluing the dough together. And now we have a nice dough roll, almost. So seam side up, just putting this together, making sure this looks rectangular again. And now I just take this side, fold it over, and I roll the dough inside. Nice. Now the edges look a little bit like this. That doesn't look so nice during the bake. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna gently seal them. Also from the other side. Now, this is our bread dough. We don't want it to stick to the banneton, so we are just gonna be flouring this a little bit and into the banneton. If you don't have a banneton, you could also be using a bowl with a kitchen towel inside. Let's proceed next with our baguette. I'm going to flip the baguette over, and now I'm just taking this one side and I'm pushing it into the middle, pushing it down here. This creates nice dough strength again. I'm pulling over the seam, tucking the baguette down. One more time again from the other side. And because we waited, our dough doesn't resist as much. One more time again from the other side. In total, this is my 4th time now. So this is pretty much our baguette. It's not fully ready yet. We want it to be a little bit elongated. Just flouring my hands just a little bit, and now I'm rolling the dough over the surface. And I do this until my baguettes have this shape that I like. I think this looks great. The size, of course, depends on the size of your oven, so you have to be a little bit careful. I think this is a perfect baguette though. Now we need to prepare our linen. And you really want to be using a lot of flour because you don't want the baguette to stick to your linen. That would be a catastrophe. This also helps to dry out the surface a little bit, making scoring in the end, a tiny incision, a lot easier. And now I just take the baguette and place it upside down here on the linen. And now I can just make a small edge like this. I'm gonna put this against the wall, and here I could be placing more baguettes directly next to it. And here I'm just gonna be placing our bun. Now, do you want to make a round bun or a baguette shaped bun? I'm opting for the baguette shaped bun now. And same thing again, outside, inside, rotate. And I do think actually this is already the perfect shape. So I'm not gonna be changing anything. More flour here on the linen. Give it a good rub. And now I'm placing it next to the baguette. So now it's time to take the linen and push it against the wall to give the baguette a little bit more support. And the same thing applies to our bun. I think it could be floured a little bit more here. Give it some extra support. Push it against. And now we use the rest of the linen to just cover them. They're gonna proof there now, just like our bread dough. And what I'll be doing is I'll be applying the finger poke test here. When I see that this dent is still visible after around 1 to 2 minutes, I know that this is ready to be baked. This is gonna take anywhere between 1 to 2 hours probably. And while it's proofing, I'm also going to cover this with another kitchen towel. And now our pizza ball, I'm just gonna drag it a little more over the surface to make it nice and round. And look at all these nice pockets of air here. Perfect though. Just gonna place it here on the countertop. This is a trick that I learned in Naples when I was working there. I'm just gonna cover this with another wetted kitchen towel. This makes sure that the dough does not dry out, which is nothing we want for our pizza dough. Glutenabend, haha. Sorry, that was bad. Sorry from the bottom of my heart. My oven is such a mess. I should have cleaned it before. So we're gonna make the pizza in the home oven. I think a stone is great. If you have a steel, that might be even better. I didn't want to use a dedicated pizza oven for now. So my setup is as close as possible to the rack. And if your oven has a broiler barbecue function, then activate that. This is gonna make you a 95% awesome pizza, 5% extra. That's what you need a special oven for. So let's do this. The pizza sauce is made out of some tomatoes out of my garden with just a little bit of salt. Normally like to use some Marzano tomatoes, but these are tomatoes from my garden, so I think that's gonna taste even better. Let's lift the cover of our dough ball and nice, look at this. It nicely puffed up. It didn't stick, it didn't dry out. I really think this is a game changer. Just gonna be sprinkling some flour on top of the dough ball now. Carefully flip it over. Some more flour. Now, there are different techniques that you can use, but I'll show you mine. I like to use this technique. I think it's quite easy and definitely very easy for making pizza at home. This dough feels so nice to work with. Look at this, all this gluten development. Super good dough. And it's a sourdough dough. This is really the kind of consistency that you want. Since I don't have a pizza peel right now, I'm just gonna be using another tray. So if you have a pizza peel, this is of course gonna be way easier, but I was too lazy to go to the basement. And voila! I think I could probably have used a little bit larger of a dough. Also here when stretching the pizza, when shaping the pie, I could have been a little bit more careful, but since it's very late, I figured this is gonna be my nice dinner. Good looking pizza, definitely. And the aroma, I wish you could smell this. And now because the oven is already hot, let's bake our bread baguette and bread roll. To set up, here I have a heat resistant bowl. It should be something that can withstand a rapid heat change. In this case, it's made out of metal. I do have a few rocks inside. It could also be made out of clay or something different. Just be sure that it's nothing that can shatter that easily. Then I have my stone. Here we will be placing everything at the same time, and the trick is there is going to be another tray here on top, and this way we are simulating a Dutch oven. I'll be placing boiling water inside. That water is going to move upwards and it's going to create a very steamy environment. Make sure that the fan is turned off if you can turn off the fan, or if you have a gas operated oven, then maybe a Dutch oven is the only option you have. If you're lucky to have a steam injection oven, I still recommend that you have this tray here on top just to shield the dough from the top heating elements. Let's do this. I'm using a bit of parchment paper. It makes loading our doughs a lot easier. This is something that I always struggled with when I started baking. It's actually not so challenging. Just carefully remove the dough here from the linen, and then with your hands place it on the parchment paper. What you can do is you can use a little bit of cardboard to make your life even easier. And see how the dough likes to stick? And because we use a lot of flour, it's not sticking. And now I'm gonna be doing something completely different that I normally never do. I'm gonna bake everything for 30 seconds and then I will score it. And this is gonna make scoring so much easier because we build a bit of a layer on top that's dried out even more. And then we can make our incision even easier. Let me show you. So this is where the parchment paper comes in really, really handy. This just makes loading the doughs so easy. So I just baked the dough for 30 seconds with steam and the surface is a lot easier to cut now. And you can also just be using a plain razor blade. I have a small attachment, but it's definitely not required. For the baguette, it's super important that you just flay the dough almost as horizontal as possible. Same here, I'm respecting the 45-degree angle, so 45 is almost a little bit different here. So at the center, it's around the 45-degree angle. I'm moving this a little bit more to the right, so I'm trying to cut as horizontal as possible. I'm trying to cut below the surface. And the same thing here with our bun. And now let's load everything back to the oven. Steam is so essential for bread making. What's gonna happen now is that steam creates some sort of gel consistency on top of the dough, and through that incision our dough is able to rise upwards. And I can already feel the oven venting out all the steam. Homemade ovens are always made to dry out your food, sort of. So the more steam you can create, the better. The first 25 minutes of the bake I bake at 230 degrees Celsius with as much steam as possible. Then I remove the source of steam, and then it depends on how dark do you like your bread to be. Based on your preference, you can bake for longer or for less. While we are waiting, let's test our pizza. This is so good. Just look at this super fluffy dough. I really can't wait to show you the bread. And voila! Wow, look at these three beautiful pieces of bread. The baguette, perfect ears, nice shape. This is amazing. Our bread roll, also nice and beautiful, very simple. Would be nice to maybe have added a few more seeds or something to this as well. And lastly, the big bread, still very hot. Look at this amazing ear here. This was quite close to the broiler. I should probably have placed this even lower in the oven. But I think we just made 4 amazing products out of one single dough. So this would be the type of dough that I would be choosing. It's just so incredibly versatile.